The voice of Husker Nation is on the air. This is Hail Varsity Radio. Insight, opinion, expertise, along with the biggest names talking Nebraska sports. Join in with the show at 402-489-1240 or 1-800-825-5865. Now, here are your hosts, Chris Schmidt and Elijah Herbel.
Great to have you in midweek editions here. It's Hail Varsity. Chris Schmidt, Elijah Herbel, Justice Rhody, and you. Numbers to dial up: 489-1240, 489-1240, 800-825-5865. Can email Chris at hailvarsity.com, and always like and subscribe. Hail Varsity YouTube channel. Can watch the show there. Hail Varsity Radio Twitter at HVarsity Radio, and can find us on social media as well at Schmidt_radio, at Herbal Essence for Elijah, at Justice Rhody for Justice. As the portal world turns, we'll dive into some of the targets that are visiting, planning on visiting, and some of the names to look out for as Nebraska will try and add some pieces to play beyond the Pinstripe Bowl. Great news for Nebraska football fans in the black shirts. Keona Davis back. That tweeted out a little earlier today. We'll have some thoughts on that. And the schedule. The schedule makers. Did Nebraska a good favor in 2025? Does it look daunting? Or are you, like me, I'm going to see what the hell the roster looks like, and then we'll pencil in the W's or the L's. I have finally, after 100 years, learned my lesson on that, I think. But at first glance, the schedule and some of the other squads that are coming off banner years. What does their 2025 look like? And is it the hoodie to Chapel Hill? That is fascinating to see if that, in fact, becomes a thing with Bill Belichick in North Carolina. Pretty vital time in the world of college football if you want to be a football program that is considered, despite your brand, what's your brand in football? That's what's making money. We'll talk about that. Evan Bland with us in hour 2. We'll get a Jock Doc segment with Dr. Brandon Seifert with Nebraska Orthopedic Center. He's in the green room, and I'm just saying, I imagine there's some Grateful Dead playing in the background. Mike Babcock with us from Hail Varsity and Hurrdat Sports here in about 15 minutes. Guys, how we doing? It's been newsworthy. It's been eventful. There's a couple more portal names on the wrong side of the portal. I guess I shouldn't say wrong side, but on the departure side for Nebraska. But let's start off with Keona Davis, the talented freshman from Tucson that saw 90 snaps. You had 9 tackles. You had 1.5 TFLs, but you saw that incredible P word. You saw that potential, right? Where are you at? I wasn't even thinking that.
Elijah's in the gutter, and it's not even 4:30.
Yeah, I mean, it's that potential, brother.
Okay.
Wow. You go to bowling league, and you come back, and, well, is it Friday night, and is it time to go to hit up on some late? Come on, man.
Incredible P is not pasta ranguli, Elijah. That's not what we're talking about.
Okay.
That potential from Keona.
We were all thinking it.
No. I'm just going to hit air brakes, let them fly right by, and we'll get to the starting 5.
I'm back.
That's fine. I think of when we're talking football and talent, and I think of that incredible P word, I think of potential.
You gotta stop.
Okay? Potential. Keona Davis. We've heard from recruiting analysts. We've heard from football folks. We have seen it, too, that the guy can flat out play at 6'5", 260. And you want him in New York City. You want him in 2025. So I'm not shocked, but there's 2 things with this. One, all right, thank you, Emmett Johnson, for setting a precedent where you can come back if you're the right guy. There's probably like 6 guys on this roster that can say, I'm out, now I'm back in. So, good. Keona Davis is on that short list we talked about. With Keona Davis, he's a guy that you know can get after the quarterback. You like his motor. I mean, the guy's always running around, downfield, at the line of scrimmage, chasing the football. So not always do you get that with guys that big. Sometimes they take a playoff or two. Wow. This is not scripted. Okay.
I'm back really fast. Justice, you got to go clip the drop. We're gonna turn that into an intro somewhere.
Oh Lord.
Talking about potential. Mike Babcock is just going to go wander in traffic here. I'm not coming on with these losers. So with Keona Davis, though, a couple of things. One, you can't lose him because of what you've already lost. 2, he's one of those guys you've invested in from a development standpoint. And Nebraska being able to have a defensive coordinator and D-line coach in place helps probably with some reassurances here. And the other part is when you see your bros at 1890 and you, the Husker fan base that contribute to 1890, give them a big old hug, all right? Because the reality is you've already put some time in if you're Keona Davis. You probably got a bump. I don't know that to be factual, but I would just say he's a guy that you say, yeah, if somebody comes in and says, I need a raise, you look at the personnel, you look at the cupboard, and you say, we don't have many dudes that can do what you can do, or we think, more importantly, what you can do for the next 3 years here. So that is kind of my 2 cents on Keona Davis, but it is it's big. And quite honestly, you have a tendency to have the sky is falling, and you've had that mindset as a Nebraska fan potentially with a lot of just what the hell losses, all right? But now you get into this portal era, and it's been panic level 6 with your quarterback situation till he put his statement out. And it's also a situation where, oh, hell no, Emmett's leaving. Okay, fans are freaking out. Oh, Keona Davis is out. Who's next? And this is something you've not dealt with before. You've dealt with departures. You've dealt with the Wan'Dale Robinsons going to the portal or going to the transfer and then go thrive. I think we think that Keona Davis is one of these guys that if he stays healthy and he stays hungry, can go kick butt and take names and would have done it somewhere else, and he'd have been kicking dirt about it. So he's just it's an optics thing, but it's also a projection thing.
Well, it's a guy who's likely going to be kicking ass and taking names sooner rather than later. That's
you need him to be.
Exactly. I mean, if you go back, watch the USC game in full. It was still limited snaps. I'd put his total number of snaps in that football game below 20.
He wasn't overmatched.
He wasn't overmatched, and he had 3 or 4 splash plays. There's one, I know it ended up on Twitter. I can't remember who put it out there, but I remember seeing it live in the stadium.
Screen, right?
Yeah, where he gets into the passing lane, and they have to kind of feather over him on the screen, and he's able to stop in his tracks, get his hips flipped, and chase down his screen. I don't think he stopped it from being a first down, but that even makes it a little bit more impressive that he's 12 yards in defensive backfield after being in the quarterback's face trying to knock down a screen. To flip his hips, turn, run, and chase him down as a defensive lineman was one of those plays that made me stop and go, wow.
Yeah, I think the play that impressed me about Davis the most was week 2 against Colorado. He was matched up against Seton for a couple snaps. Mm-hmm. He gets around, beats him. They run an outside run to the other side. He clear chases Charlie Offerdahl to the sideline, tracks him down after 2 yards. I was like, this guy's a freak show, dude.
Yeah, it comes down to that little bit more work he needs to do on his body and then being more consistent, which he'll get more opportunities to be consistent next year because, as I said on Monday, I think that was the guy that this coaching staff is planning on being a starter next season. When you look at the line next season, I think you have Linhart, Van Poppel, and Davis is the 3 you're going to roll with. Then you have some rotational pieces as well, primarily Judy, who I think can maybe play all of those roles in the defensive line. We'll see. I know they bulked him up just a little bit this year. But I think that is probably, as I see it from the outside looking in, the 3 you're going to roll with as your top guys on the defensive line next season. To lose one of those would have been massive, and I don't think it's a coincidence that Husker fans and those in the media were shocked, and then 2 days later now the Husker staff has gotten him back around. I think a lot of people inside this program and outside this program see what you have in Keona Davis. I mean, was it Knighton or was it Terrence? Or was it Tony White last fall?
It was White. It was Rule. It was all three.
But who was the one that mentioned the fact that they think he could play like 93 someday?
I think it was Tony White.
I think it was Tony White as well. Whenever you watch how he plays, you see why. Obviously, he's got a lot of work to do in the weight room to be like an Ndamukong Suh type, but you can see that athletic potential from the defensive line spot just absolutely jump off the screen every time you watch him.
Let's get our starting five shout-outs going. NASCAR Eric is here. The other Dave checks in. Jeff is here. He says Keona Davis is back in. And Jeff Snitley here, part of the Boulder Peace Treaty. Good to have Snitley in. Jay checks in. Arlo Jr. is here. Great Red Shark says hello. In to monitor the discontent, the former Husker team and player stats will be invariably appearing and possible for a bit with discussion. Walter from Philly is still wanting an update and a change on special teams. Justin here, good to have you. Uncle Larry checks in. Tuck says, I'm going to the portal. No, I'm not. Cliff is here from Florida. Good to have you, Montana Husker fan. Howdy Nerd says Moonbot7. Andrew checks in as well. Good to have Andrew in. Brent is here as well. 3-putt. Work on that 3-putt. I've been working on mine. Vince here says the forecast for the Pinstripe Bowl is no snow. I bet Phil Snow is going to be making his way to. Okay, bad joke. Sorry. Wrestling Oranges is here. Good to have you, Wrestling Oranges. Anonymous is here. Okay, he gets to one of the names that's in the portal as of today, and that's Nate Borkacher, or Bo Richter if you're Gus. Borkacher doesn't come back. If he doesn't come back, the only player left from the COVID year would be Turner Corcoran. If he comes back, I like Nate Borkacher's game. I know Dana Holgerson doesn't have a whole lot of history with tight ends. I think the bigger bodies, Elijah, you have right now that you can flex out or you'll use in that motion crack kind of wham block is Bonner and maybe Carter Nelson. Mm-hmm. But I really like Borkacher. I hope they pay him to stay, and I hope they use him because he got usage the last 3 games, and he should have been used that way all season. Agreed.
As I read the tea leaves here, though, we heard last week from Rule at the signing day presser that they plan to use Heinrich Harburg in a role moving forward that is not
your tea leaves say tight end.
After today, my tea leaves say tight end.
Or H-back, same thing.
It's kind of same thing. That's what the tight end is going to be in modern football offenses anyways. It's going to be a guy that can flex out and play in the slot, a guy that can line up and play in the backfield, a guy that can be in line and play on the end of the line of scrimmage. It's a very multifaceted role. Just to read the tea leaves here, I wonder if that means Heinrich Harburg, welcome to the tight end position, because Borkacher is a guy that I think you felt good about if he had decided to come back as being a guy to get some playing time next year. Does that change if you have a Heinrich Harburg that has put on 20 to 25 pounds in the offseason but maintains that athleticism? Is he now a guy that from an athletic point of view, an athletic profile, matches what you want at the tight end position just a little bit more?
What's Harburg's weight? Is he 230, 225?
Let's look it up.
What's he got to put on?
Listed on the Husker roster as 225.
Okay.
At 6'5", so you'd probably put 25 pounds on him, get him to 245, 250 for tight end.
Okay.
My read.
No, and you pray that the explosiveness stays, and the shiftiness stays. Tiger Shark Diver is in. Black Hills Brennan, not that P word, Black Hills Brennan. Bruce is here. Good to have Bruce checking in as well. 489-1240 to get in. Phil checks in. If you're friends with the P, then you're friends with me, says Phil. We all love potential. Wayne is here. Conservatively, the schedule looks like anywhere between 1-11 and 12-0. Check back with me at the end of the season. We'll get into the schedule thoughts. QB1 Ace says this: Harburg will be an upgrade at tight end. Chris L says, so glad Keona Davis is back. Now let's get Borkacher back. I hope they make another run at him to come back. Jacob Hood also in the portal. Of course, he was a transfer from Georgia. He had kind of changed his body a little bit, and he needed to from how he came in. Super raw, but great size and ability with the footwork. You could see what maybe he could become, but right now, Elijah, is it too simplistic to say that you're too deep with some threes and then your development guys when we get down to this 105? That's got to be the blueprint.
I feel like you have your top two units and then probably a third unit with your developmental guys below that. Maybe not a fully fleshed out third unit, depending on how many developmental guys you want to keep / walk-ons. But yeah, that's about how I feel. KG
is asking the important question: could Harburg become a lineman? I love the athleticism. He's got the tenacity, but throw him the football. Great to be with you on a Wednesday. Mike Babcock's on the way. It's Hail Varsity YouTube channel.
And now, back to Hail Varsity Radio.
Great to have you back. It's Hail Varsity. Chris Schmidt, Elijah Herbel. We welcome in with Hail Varsity, Hurrdat Sports, Mr. Husker Football, Mike Babcock with us at MD Babs on Twitter. Babbers, how we doing on Wednesday?
Yeah, I'm doing great. I was going to leave my mic off and just move my mouth and then claim that I was saying really insightful things.
You are. You're always insightful. You know this. And it's been just a bevy of emotions for the Nebraska fan base as KG in the stream says that Adam Schefter reports it's official. Bill Belichick to North Carolina.
Wow, that's a hire that's got a lot of potential.
Totally does, and a lot of potential in Carolina, Elijah. Mike, what do you think of Nebraska's ability to keep the potential to keep that came through with Emmett Johnson and Keona Davis? A couple of names that you didn't want going anywhere. That dipped their toe into the water, but said, you know what, I'm gonna stay on some dry land, i.e. Nebraska. Those are two big retentions for the Big Red.
Yeah, I was glad to see that. I suspect that they probably Nebraska coaching staff, said, hey, we can do a little better for you here, and we obviously you're going to have an opportunity to contribute in a significant way. So I thought that was important. You see guys go into the transfer portal, and from what he's said at the news conferences, I suspect that Rule has talked to these guys and has said things, and in some situations maybe indicated that it might be in their best interest to move on. Even guys that we think would be important to keep. Rule said he'd like to keep everybody, but he obviously can't do that. But those two guys, I'm glad that they reversed field there and decided to come stay at Nebraska, because I think they'll both be significant contributors.
And Mike, one of the things I do wonder about with especially Keona Davis reversing course coming back to Nebraska is the impact of actually having a full-time defensive coordinator and a defensive line coach announced. We were wondering this yesterday in terms of Nebraska's ability to go after guys in the transfer portal. It's difficult to go sell a defensive guy on a project and be like, but also you don't know who your defensive coach is going to be whenever you get here, and your defensive line coach, we don't know that either. Not an easy pull. I think it was the timing was right in that sense, but I think it also helps with getting a guy back from the portal to be able to say, yeah, you already know who your defensive coordinator is going to be, and we have a defensive line coach for you that just worked for multiple seasons with the Kansas City Chiefs, and he's a 3-time Super Bowl champion.
Yeah, I agree, Elijah. I think that the timing there, the sequence of events, probably had something significant to do with Davis, changing his mind and deciding to come back, because it's starting to, you're starting to get a sense of who the guys are going to be, who the coaches are going to be. The one thing that confuses me a little bit is Rhule's observation that he was going to continue with the 3-3-5, but he's bringing in people that are not what I would think are not 3-3-5 background people. That to me is a little bit confusing, but probably Davis has had some conversations and understands exactly what it is what they're planning to do, and feels comfortable with that.
Well, and you look at the kind of background of Phil Snow and John Butler with the defense. There was more comfort, I guess, with the four-man front. There's more ability to just have a four-man, and Nebraska's going to want to just be a four-man pressure, ideally, not half the blitz. I don't disagree with Coach Rhule talking about what he liked about Tony White's defense and the different run blitzes, the different angles they attacked. I mean, it got figured out a little bit if you couldn't stop the run, or you had a team that could, keep you off balance and be balanced themselves. When I think about the Illinois game or USC specifically. So maybe they want to go more towards that four-man, and they did a lot of four-man, but they need that hybrid guy, don't they, to be able to stand up and also get his hand in the dirt with that fourth down lineman, because Nebraska wasn't exclusively just a three-man front. Sometimes they needed the fourth man. Hell, sometimes they needed the fifth man based on how a couple of teams ran on them.
Yeah, well, and I think they're all in on defense, obviously. You guys talked about this earlier in the week, but you've got Snow, who was defensive coordinator for Rhule with the Panthers, at Temple, at Baylor, right? Mm-hmm. As involved in it. You got Rhule involved in it. He's kind of a defensive guy, as you pointed out. And then you've got a defensive coordinator. You've got three guys really figuring out what it is you're going to be, how you're going to approach your defense. And I think that's a positive, definitely. And if I'm a player like Davis that has the potential and as indicated has shown that, I'm going to feel pretty good about staying at Nebraska in that situation. But when he initially made the decision to put his name, or said he was going to put his name in the transfer portal, you didn't have all those pieces in place. You weren't ready to do that. And I guess you got an outside linebackers coach now too, mm-hmm. right? In Simpson. So it has more shape now than it did a couple of days ago, when guys were making the decision to put their name in the transfer.
Mike, what do you think of the schedule that's out? You've got Cincinnati that's TBA. We're pretty confident that means Arrowhead. You've got Michigan to end your brief stretch of September home games, 3 of them there. You get your bye before Sparty. You're at Minnesota. The place has been tough to win at for Nebraska. Maryland also in there as well. And then you close again like a freight train, USC at UCLA, out to Siberia after your bye week, the 15th at Penn State. Then you close with Iowa. Does it look doable? Does it look manageable right now? And I ask that. I know it's kind of a blind faith response possibly, because you don't know who's here. You have an idea who's playing quarterback. You have an idea now who's playing some D-line. But this roster is going to be flipped around.
Yeah, well, you can't look past Houston Christian. I think you got to focus on that first. I didn't even know there was a college football team. What level is that?
I don't know, but they've done a couple of satellite camps there.
They're FCS.
Okay. Well, that makes sense.
They're in the
guess, but
Southland Conference.
And they'll probably be playing Alabama, Auburn, LSU, and somebody else in November.
Yeah. The SEC needs to change to a 9-game conference schedule. They need to be forced into doing that.
Good luck.
Yeah, they call the shots. I think it can be a challenging schedule, obviously. Starting off with that opening game, if you're going to play that thing in Arrowhead Stadium, that's going to be a challenging thing. And just like you always do, I think game by game, you got to approach it that way. But you can be in a good position when you get down to that brutal stretch at the end, as you point out. But you can't look to that point. You got to get to that point first. You got to be focused. And the way things went this season, you were close enough in games. You could have picked up some wins there. Hopefully you'll be in a better position next season with that schedule, that you'll have an opportunity. You're Houston Christian, Akron, you're going to, there's a couple should be wins. And you see how the Cincinnati thing goes, and you build some momentum going into conference play.
Mike, it should be noted here, I've been doing some research. Houston Christian technically began in 2013, but their first full season was 2014 when they were known as Houston Baptist. They changed their name in 2022 to Houston Christian, and in their entire football history, they have never had an above 500 season.
Okay, yeah, Houston Baptist. I did that was a name that I would be familiar with, and certainly would be one of those what you would say scheduled wins. No disrespect, but I think that's what it is.
It's all right. I know I love the couch of no disrespect, but you pay someone to come in here and get slaughtered. That's how it used to be.
Well, I was always going to start up my own business. I was going to call it Slugs or Us. And I was going to do the research and then contact schools and say, okay, here, I've done the research. You could say Houston Baptist now, Houston Christian has never had a winning season, and they have these dates available. Would you like me to pick it out for you or whatever? I thought that would be a good sort of a side gig kind of a thing, but not smart enough to put it together.
What's your bet on Bill Belichick in North Carolina? The Athletics saying it's official, and I wanted to get your reaction. Do you think it will work in Chapel Hill?
I don't think it's going to work, because here's a guy that he doesn't have any kind of college experience, right? I mean, it's an NFL guy. Just
with his dad at Navy, and I mean, there's some crossover with McBride.
Son, yeah. But to go into this college football world as it is now with NIL, can he handle those kinds of things? Would be the biggest concern for me. Can he handle the NIL? Can he handle transfer portal? Can he handle all these things? Is it enough like the NFL, aspects of the NFL to allow him to do it? There's no question about his ability as a coach. I think that's a given. He'll do a good job of coaching them up, but all these other things come into are factors on whether you win or lose. That, again, guys that transfer out, NIL. I don't know what North Carolina, how that sits in terms of NIL, but those are very difficult things, I think, for anybody coming into a position, particularly a former NFL coach at his age.
Mike, we'll do it again next week. Appreciate your insight. Always fun to talk some Husker football, bud.
I'll try to think of something intelligent to say next week.
You're good. Just keep cranking that Grateful Dead, brother. Love it. Mike Babcock, Mr. Husker Football, with us from Hail Varsity and Hurrdat Sports. Appreciate Babbers. We'll react to Bill Belichick off the Chapel Hill.
And now, back to Hail Varsity Radio.
Back with you. It's Hail Varsity. Open phones here till 5 at 489-1240. 489-1240, 800-825-5865. All the folks in the stream are pretty fascinated here by Bill Belichick in North Carolina. Trevor, good to have you in. Trevor says, I don't think it works in Chapel Hill. Flies Goodbye says, that guy is pretty damn awesome. Used to, Babbers, he's talking about Babbers. Pretty awesome. And Flies Goodbyes from Tennessee when Babbers was rocking it with Huskers Illustrated. Eric checks in, says North Carolina plays Central Florida next year. Belichick versus Frost. What week is that? Like week 5?
September 20th, which makes it...
Same weekend as Michigan, Nebraska.
To make it week 4? 1, 2, I think week 4.
Yeah. We'll get some thoughts on Nebraska's schedule here coming up. Evan Bland in about 20 minutes. Also, we'll dive into some portal names to watch this week and moving forward, and a couple of names that could round out Nebraska's defensive staff from a secondary standpoint. But The Athletic, this is Rebecca Tauber and Jeff Howe reporting that Bill Belichick has agreed to a deal to become the North Carolina head coach. That from their source. Now, they whacked Mac Brown, who's a year older. But, Elijah, this thing is moving more and more, this thing being college football, towards the NFL. 14 victories away from Don Shula. This, to me, signifies a couple of things. One, that he is just not, for whatever reason, an option for NFL squads. Now, never say never, but he had 25% of the jobs open a year ago, and he was passed by. And he's got a persona. It's kind of a one-way street with Bill Belichick, and not a lot of owners are okay with that, specifically one in Dallas. His son, Stephen Belichick, coordinated the defense for Jed Fish at Washington. I think they were top 25 or so. I know Washington was 6-6, but this is succession. This is setting something up for his son because coach in waiting is going to be Stephen Belichick. 2, this 400-page Belichick manifesto is very real. And what's hilarious about it is he's got the Van Halen clause in it from the Diamond David Lee Roth era where no brown M&Ms, please, in the bowl. But he had a page dedicated to munchies. That means potato chips with various kinds of dip, 12 different kinds of yogurt. You had pretzels and other things. One of those things to make sure you read through all 400 pages. But right now, he can hire recruiters, and right now he can put the plan together and just manage it. Be the talent evaluator, the on-field coach, and get his kid's foot in the door with coach in waiting. So the other thing that was vital, and it sounds like Matt Hayes reported this, Carolina upped their, this was nuts, their football NIL was only $4 million. It's now at 20. It's supposed to be at $20 million. You got to be competitive. Lastly, you are at a vital time as a college football program. Carolina basketball is always going to rule the day. College football will always make the money for the school. And you've seen incredible basketball programs bet wrong, and Kansas football has righted that wrong with Coach Leipold with a new stadium renovation. UConn has drifted away. Wasn't that long ago UConn football was a top 25 Big East school. Well, what happened to the Big East? They've all moved, all right, because it was a basketball priority league. Football is king. Football prints money. And what Deion did at Colorado was made that school relevant, and they're good this year. Bill Belichick's going to make North Carolina football and the school relevant to be attractive with his final round of realignment if it goes to a Super Team 40 league setup. You got to be included. You'd think Carolina would be included because of the Jordan brand, but now you're pretty much assured that if Belichick sticks around.
There's a couple reasons why I think this hire is going to work. First one is one that you mentioned. The first and foremost, what this is going to do is it's going to energize the North Carolina football boosters. into getting the NIL funds up, not just for basketball, but also for football. That's one factor why I think it can work. Number two, what did Bill Belichick do better than anybody in the NFL with the Patriots?
Spy.
Well, scout. Scout is what I was going to say, and that's twofold. One, they had one of the best scouting departments of college football players in the NFL, where the Patriots every single
Spying
year...
is scouting.
Yeah. Every single year, though, they'd find random guys in the 6th and 7th round that nobody else wanted, and you look up, and 3 years later, they're Pro Bowlers with the New England Patriots. They had their Patriot way, their... what would you call it? Their mentality that they instilled within their football team. Once that was instilled, you could plug and play. Schmidt's trying to distract me with memes while in the middle of my point.
This is hilarious. Twitter's blown up where Bill Belichick apparently scoping out scouting sorority row with binoculars. He's already taken care of. I mean, he's got a sweet girlfriend that's going to grad school there.
Probably. But back to my point, though. He's going to be able to find undervalued guys recruiting and in the transfer portal that fit the scheme that he wants to play. And they're going to be the type of guys that look at Bill Belichick and go, oh, 6 Super Bowl rings, 7 Super Bowl rings, whatever it is. Yeah, sign me up. I want to play for you. He's going to find the guys that fit his system and fit his mentality. And also those poor coaches in the ACC that now have to try to go out game plan Bill Belichick every single week. That is going to be huge for North Carolina. I think it's going to work. I don't think Bill Belichick is going to be there for very long. I think he's going to lay the foundation and then retire and set it up for his son. But I think what he does do there will be good for the North Carolina football program. I don't understand how people can look at one of the greatest coaches in football history and say, it's not going to work out.
Here's why it won't. It's his personality and how he treats 18 to 22-year-olds. Is he going to change to the point where he recognizes it is a kinder, gentler era? And he can MF Tom Brady and Julian Edelman and Gronk and Teddy Bruschi and go down the list. He gave everybody hell and probably belittled and got the best out of you. Russ Hochstein, going to be with us, played and won a couple Super Bowls, Husker standout, and you had to always be on edge, always be ready. I mean, he teached and preached teamwork, yes, but you had to always be ready to do your job. You had to be locked in mentally. It was a mental approach as much as physical. And can he get that out of 18 to 22-year-olds? What's his patience level like with them, and what's their patience level like with him?
I think he's going to find guys with his scouting eyes.
Oh, I don't doubt that he'll find the talent. Will he keep the talent in?
I'm thinking the talent that he's going to find are going to be guys that gel with him and his coaching philosophy, similar to what Saban did at Bama.
Okay.
Saban, he wasn't shy about yelling at Bama. And did he have guys that transferred out? Did he have guys that didn't like it? Absolutely. But the majority of the guys he had in that program respected it and got better from it. Well, that's what I think Belichick can do in North Carolina.
They saw it work. It'll be pretty fascinating. We'll wind down hour one. Evan Bland on the way. It's Hail Varsity YouTube channel.
And now, back to Hail Varsity Radio.
Thanks for spending time, Evan Bland. Who is Nebraska targeting in the portal? Who is visiting? And we'll keep giving your reaction to Bill Belichick apparently going to North Carolina. So the good news is, I would imagine, to help kind of seal this North Carolina and Bill Belichick marriage, I'm sure the great outside linebacker, former Tar Heel Lawrence Taylor probably weighed in. Of course, Parcells was the man in Big Blue for the Giants, but the coordinator for those Giants Super Bowl championships in the 80s. And of course, the Buffalo Super Bowl in 1990, I think, was Bill Belichick before he went off to Cleveland. And I'm sure that there's some sort of, come on, Bill, you got to come to Chapel Hill. I just don't know that Lawrence will be able to return the favor. I don't know if Lawrence is able to leave the state he's currently living in or not. Reminder to get buckled up. Use your seatbelt. It saves lives. It prevents injuries only if properly worn. Make it click. A message from the NDOT Highway Safety Office.
Well, should we go timing here really fast? I am of the opinion that Bill Belichick was probably spending too much time with his 24-year-old girlfriend, and that was probably wearing on him, so he decided to get back into football. That's the only thing that makes sense to me. Timing-wise, is it interesting that Nebraska hires their defensive coordinator yesterday, and today Bill Belichick goes off to North Carolina?
No connection whatsoever.
Let me have fun for a little bit.
No, that's fine.
Could be fun.
You're telling me the Butler hire is on par with the Belichick news, are you?
No, I'm saying that Nebraska got done interviewing Bill Belichick and John Butler.
I see.
Interviewed them both, and Matt Rule said, John Butler's our guy. And Bill Belichick said, I guess I'll go be the head coach in North Carolina.
Man, I didn't get the Nebraska gig. Butler character got it. So
yeah, I guess I'll settle for North Carolina.
I'm going to go to North Carolina. It's untapped. I'll say that. It's a sleeping giant. Just make sure there are no brown M&Ms in the bowl. But again, I read the part of the manifesto: potato chips, assorted dips, nuts, pretzels, no brown M&Ms, 12 Reese's, 12 specific Reese's peanut butter cups, and 12 assorted yogurt cups on ice.
12's a lot of. I get 12 different flavors of yogurt cups, or 12 different yogurt cups of assorted flavors.
And you need to ask him.
Okay.
Do you want all blueberry? Do you want Greek vanilla?
Well,
coconut?
The two you need. Greek vanilla. Peach and strawberry, right?
Give me the old coconut.
I do like a good black cherry. Coconut's not bad. It's not my first choice.
I found a container of yogurt that expired in August 31st in the back of our fridge that I about dove into, and thankfully, I tossed it.
Isn't yogurt itself
expired and spoiled? Yes,
yeah.
but this thing had a funk to it that would have put us on the DL for a while.
I wonder if Bill Belichick just went because they're full of that special P word, playoff aspirations.
So it looks like it's a 3-year, $30 million deal. Apparently, KG helping us up to date here.
Here's the stake in a beer bet for a day. Does Bill Belichick live to see the end of that contract? Not in a literal sense, but in like a retirement sense. I phrased that really poorly.
He gets it up and running, and then Steven gets to take over. So Belichick was just absolutely bored out of his mind, and he's done a few pod hits or the Mannings, but he wants to get back in it. That's all he knows. All right, Evan Bland with the latest on some Nebraska portal targets next hour.
Hail Varsity Radio is live. Now, back to Schmitty.
Schmitty's a great guy, but he don't have a brain.
And Elijah.
You want me to speak? When I point at you, yeah.
On Hail Varsity Radio.
Back with you, it's Hour 2. It's Hail Varsity. Chris Schmidt, Elijah Herbel, Justice Rhody, Hail Varsity YouTube channel, where you can like and subscribe. Hail Varsity Radio, Twitter. Evan Bland with the Omaha World Herald in at Evan Bland, OWH. Follow him on Twitter. Read him with Omaha.com. Evan, as the portal turns, how we doing?
It's different every 5 minutes, every hour, whatever it might be. I'm not sure fluid is an apt enough term. What's air? I think it moves a little bit quicker, maybe even than water does right now.
It is movement. Bleep show is another couple of words you can maybe use as well. Before we get into portal names, true or false, Bill Belichick will be the only guy to refuse wearing the color Carolina blue because he thinks it makes him look soft.
I don't know. I mean,
I love Carolina blue.
I don't mind it. Yeah, I like the Air Jordan logo, and I mean they got a lot of cool merch out there. It's not quite the whatever you want to call it, royal blue, darker blue of the Patriots time, quite. But I wonder if that's a factor for any coaches. Is like their what colors clash with their skin tone and their hair color and all the rest. So he's got enough money and cred that I suppose even the smallest details he could take into account.
Well, details, brown M&Ms, no brown M&Ms.
And there's also the real chance that his girlfriend was just sitting there going, I could put together a great Carolina outfit for you, Bill.
Uh-huh.
Like his girlfriend might just be dressing him on the sideline
and he'll say yes, which is the wise thing to do. Who will say yes to Nebraska? Evan, let's get there. Good news for Nebraska. Keona Davis said yes. Just kidding. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, it's part of the new reality now where you can go in the portal and presumably find out quickly what you're looking for, whether that's gauging interest elsewhere or, leveraging yourself for a better financial opportunity where you are. And it is rare. Like you look at historically in the portal era, spanning, 6 or 7 years or whatever, like it was about a 2% proposition that if you went in the portal, you would come out at your existing school. And Nebraska only really has had a few. Phildarius Payne was one. Jamari Butler was one a couple years ago. And now you have two, although technically I don't think Emmett Johnson ever actually went in the portal. It was another example of a guy who, again, you kind of test the waters. You put it out there and see what happens. And if you don't like what you see, or the place that you're staying changes something, then you stay. And so Keona Davis, I have to imagine, was a guy who would have been highly sought after if he had just kind of gone out on the open market. I mean, those kind of big bodies with that kind of experience that he had, even as a true freshman, you don't find those guys a lot. And the numbers, again, would tell you that, like, there are certain positions you can rebuild quickly through the portal, and there are others that are a lot harder and more valuable commodities, and defensive line is one of those tougher spots. And so, I would think Nebraska maybe revisited some things with Keona Davis, but I think it's also worthy to note that they also kind of figured out their defensive staff at that point. I mean, John Butler went from interim to DC to the permanent guy with Davis, in limbo the last couple of days, and they hired a defensive line coach and Terry Braden as well. So maybe that's some of it too. And we've seen it from other players for a few years now, where when there's instability with a program or it's in flux or whatever, guys just kind of go in. And Jamari Butler, last month called it like a panic move when he went in when Nebraska had its coaching change under Matt Rule. So sometimes these are decisions that are made individually. Sometimes they're made collectively. Ultimately, though, I think Nebraska realized it wants and it needs Davis in that interior here for years to come. And, I think Davis eventually saw the light too, to where he changed heart or had to change a heart, and he's going to stick with the Huskers.
Evan Bland with us here from the Omaha World Herald, Hail Varsity Radio. And Evan, as we look at some of Nebraska's portal targets this week, we've been asking people over the past couple of days their transfer portal wish list. And we've heard Nebraska did not close the deal on Phoenix Jackson, that linebacker from Fresno State. He's committed to Auburn after canceling his visit to Nebraska today. That's kind of the reality of the portal situation, is once you get him on campus, you better get him to sign on the dotted line because it's such a fluid situation. With it being a fluid situation, what names are you paying attention to this week in terms of potential guys Nebraska not only could use next year, but also have a chance at?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like a condensed version of how we would look at high school recruiting, where, okay, you get an offer, that's step one. Do you get a visit? That's step two. And then are you a finalist and do you sign? And so, like, pretty quickly, that's kind of the first thing, is who's Nebraska offering, and then beyond that, who are they getting to campus? And early on, Omar Graham, the linebacker from Florida State, he has told me he'll be here. He may be here now at this point. Michigan has an offensive lineman, Dominic Judas. I'm not sure I'm saying that right, but he was a center for them this year. And then you can kind of go down the list. I mean, there are a number of guys who have reported Nebraska offers, but that doesn't necessarily mean they'll get to campus. Eric Rivers is a receiver from FIU who has put out that he's going to visit Nebraska later this weekend. And so, we're already starting to, I think, realize the the prediction that Dana Holgorsen put out last week about, hey, maybe 20 to 30 guys will get to campus as candidates, and then Nebraska will sign some smaller amount of that. So those are a few of those names right now. You mentioned Phoenix Jackson. I mean, another great example of a guy who was set to visit, and then another team wanted him bad enough to make him an offer that he couldn't refuse, and so he goes that direction. I think it's interesting too to look at sort of the bigger picture and say, okay, yes, the individual names and situations are interesting. But what about the positions that are being offered by Nebraska? That says a lot about kind of how they view their team and where they feel like they can strengthen up. And so you see a lot of defensive linemen in that group. You see receivers like Dane Key from Kentucky. He'd be another one you'd be looking at. Cal has a receiver named Nizia Hunter who reported an offer, who's out there. So those are some spots. And offensive line, specifically tackle, has been a spot Nebraska looks at. And that gets my attention because they have a number of tackles on their roster that could still be there next year. Turner Corcoran, Teddy Prohaska, Gunnar Gatula. So they feel like they're looking to make an addition there. Another tackle, Jacob Hood, went in the portal for Nebraska today. So it's just kind of fascinating to piece it all together and, take away maybe how Nebraska sees its team. But all that said, again, like the thing that you realize through portal recruiting in recent years is a lot of the skilled positions are spots where you can upgrade fairly quickly. There tends to be a lot of depth there. If you want to do it on the lines, but there are not as many of those guys, and you're going to end up paying more to get them in. There's going to be a lot more competition in those spots as well. So clearly Nebraska's taken its swing at some of these guys, and we'll see just how much they want to invest in these players, and if they want to come to Nebraska here to end their careers.
Evan Bland with us, Hail Varsity Radio. Evan Bland, Omaha World Herald. Catch him and Mr. Chattel and old Sammy McEwen on the Pick Six podcast. They do an awesome job. So we've kind of named some names, Evan. What about Nebraska's philosophy? You got to do your due diligence and scout who you're bringing in, and you want the portal additions to pay off. You want them to be able to go produce, and some guys just need to change the scenery from bigger programs. Signetti went lower level and brought his dudes with him to Indiana, and they really performed well. Do you like Nebraska looking at some guys from the MAC or even the Sun Belt or AAC to come play up a level? Do you like that? I don't want to say change in philosophy. It may be just who's available this year compared to last, but you know what? I'm okay with it if they're looking at guys that may be pretty hungry to prove himself on a bigger stage.
Yeah, I don't think they really care where they come from. Maybe they're from other Power 4 programs.
I need a body.
Right. Like they just don't care. Like if you're an option as an FCS school, great. If you're a group of five kind of guy who's been there for a few years and is looking to move up, cool. Like it kind of feels like, if college football and the power level is AAA, so to speak, you can kind of go down to AA or single A. It's almost like you're promoting from within. So, like, if you're a scouting department, you're not probably doing your job well enough if you're not looking at those other teams and bringing guys along. And Nebraska's done it for a while, right? Brian Buschini was an FCS punter. Omar Brown from a couple years ago was at Northern Iowa. Yeah, Samori Toure, absolutely. So, like, there are lots of examples already of guys like that who can come along, and oftentimes those are the guys who are the most internally motivated. It's not the former four-star kids. It's the guys who had one offer out of high school, or maybe they went JUCO and they just kind of popped, and maybe they were somewhere for 3 years, and they said, "Look, I'm going to try my hand on a big stage and see how that goes." And so I think all that goes into it. You hear Matt Rule talk, and Nebraska tries just as much to focus on sort of the intangible elements of a player as much as the verified numbers, the height and weight and speed and explosiveness and all that stuff. So if you have those traits and you have that hunger to want to grind and be that football player, and you can help Nebraska win games, and I think you look far and wide. And how many times do we hear Matt Rule talk about NFL draft picks that come out of North Dakota State or South Dakota or something like that, and say those guys need to be at Nebraska? I think kind of shaking the bushes for those talented players at those spots is sort of how that plays out, where they believe they can identify that talent, get it to Nebraska, even if it's just for a year or two, and help them to develop into pro players.
Elijah's going to jump schedule with you here in just a second, but just a real quick take on Washington tackle Khalil Taifa, and he's a guy that played a lot of snaps at Washington. He's one tackle that looked pretty good on film, looked good for Washington, and I know he's in the portal. Might that be a name Nebraska looks at?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, he reported a Nebraska offer last night, I think it was, and sometimes Nebraska or any school's chance is you have to kind of look at who else is offering them. I think Boise State, Arizona are some of your other schools that are after him right now. So from a resources perspective, sure, I think Nebraska could fit in there. He was a guy who was a left tackle for Washington and has, I think, 2 or 3 years left still as a college player. So that's somebody that maybe they feel like could come in and give them a couple seasons as a regular contributor. To me, again, it's a reminder of like Nebraska sees that spot or the tackle position as a priority, and maybe one that they want to fill that they don't feel like they have internally, at least not right away. And Matt Rule said that too. Like, you can't have enough offensive line depth, maybe especially on the edges when you're trying to protect Dylan Raiola and allow him to do what he does. But yeah, I think Tafi is one of those guys who would be on Nebraska's wish list. And again, it comes down to, can he get a visit? Can Nebraska get a visit? And can they figure out something that would benefit both parties?
It's Evan Bland with us here, Hail Varsity Radio. And Evan, let's flip to schedule. Nebraska learned the dates of their 2025 opponents today. First off, are you prepared to go out on a limb here and say 12-0 based on the schedule? But also, in all seriousness, you look at the home schedule, sets up pretty favorably for Nebraska. And then the road schedule, is there a road game you're already circling as being one that Husker fans will go out and see in full force?
Yeah, well, I think it's got to be UCLA and getting out to the Rose Bowl and checking that thing out. And that'll be the second year in a row that the league does Nebraska a favor by sending them to the state of California in November. I mean, that's one game you don't have to play at Northwestern or at Wisconsin or something at that point. So I think we saw that from the USC game this year, where there are a lot of Nebraska alums out in that area of the country anyway. There was a whole heck of a lot of red at the Coliseum, and so I would expect that to be the case for the Rose Bowl. Probably the opposite of that for the Penn State game 2 weeks after that. That's it's inevitable. It seems like that game has to take place in November. So who the heck knows what the weather's going to be like in late November? I think November 22nd.
I can tell you what it's going to be like.
Yeah, it's hitch up your sleds and
Planet
get out
Hoth.
there. Yeah, exactly. So that'll be interesting. But I think in general, the schedule in a lot of ways reminds me of this year, where you're really home heavy to start. It sort of gives you a nice on-ramp into the season. Who knows what Michigan will look like next September, what that team will be like. Michigan State, kind of the same thing. I mean, those are right now teams that are in Nebraska's class of the Big Ten and where they are. So I think that sets up pretty well. And you don't have sort of that road game that seems impossible. Like, it does seem like it's a manageable schedule in terms of who you don't play and where you do play different opponents. So it's kind of fun to see how it shakes out, where the buys fit in. We already knew who the opponents were, but I think that little November stretch where you go at UCLA, at Penn State with a bye week mixed in is a really interesting part of the year, and we'll see kind of how important that is for Nebraska's stretch run next season.
Evan, we'll do it again. Thanks for the time as always, man.
Thanks, guys. See ya.
And now, back to Hail Varsity Radio.
Thanks for hanging out. More thoughts on the portal, some of the names that we can get into. 489-1240, Chris Schmidt, Elijah Herbel, Justice Rhody. The schedule drop, though, and dear friend of the show, Will Compton, has already gone out in ink, 12-0. God love you, Will. But if you haven't seen it, it's Cincinnati, TBA, which means Arrowhead, Akron, Houston, Christian, Michigan State all at home, Maryland, Minnesota, Northwestern in October, and then your November stretch, SC at UCLA, bye week, Penn State, then Iowa on Black Friday. So Doug asks, what's today's news? Keona Davis, the Nebraska schedule release, Bill Belichick to North Carolina, Doug. Wow. Rich Rod to West Virginia. Wow. So here's what's important to me about this schedule. They're going to have to put a team together that is able to, this kind of jumps off of what Evan was talking about, how are things going to shape up in November? And Nebraska's November on paper looks really brand name, but also can look daunting. But if they're doing what they need to be doing in year 3, looks doable. And it all kind of depends on a lot of different factors. Where's your quarterback at now, a full 2 years in, going into November? How good is your offensive line? Your play caller, we think, is really talented. And what the hell is your defense going to be about with these new hires as, 2/3 of your season's complete? So, listen, I like Nebraska's schedule. I like that you get Michigan in Lincoln. I like that Sparty's coming to Lincoln. I like that SC and Iowa are coming to Lincoln. And then I like the fact that you're probably going to open up in Arrowhead against Cincinnati, against a Big 12 school. I'd prefer Colorado or Kansas even, or K-State, but I'll take Cincinnati. And if you're Nebraska, it's really time to turn the corner, and more so, it's time to turn the corner in November. You are 1-7 in November.
What I think really sets up well about this schedule, though, as you try to lead into November, is just how that season starts. Mm-hmm. Couldn't be better for you.
No, and you've had 2 years of it.
Let's be clear.
Last year, this year.
The positioning of where Michigan's at, and I know Michigan wasn't truly themselves this year with what you've come to expect from them. Do they have a year 2 similar to what happened at Notre Dame with Marcus Freeman, where year 1 they kind of stink, and then in year 2 they get some things figured out. They find themselves. They find out a slightly reformed identity that is still the same identity, but it's kind of a new brand of it. Is that what Michigan's going to be next year? You don't know. You like where that is. You start the year with essentially a home away from home game. Arrowhead Stadium is going to be a lot of Husker fans there. So in terms of a neutral site game, that sets up well for you. Turn around 3 straight home games. You get the Big Ten opener at home against Michigan, followed by a bye week. So even if things don't go your way against Michigan, you still have a bye week to reset. But I think that Michigan game going into the bye is going to be huge. You flip it around, it's a tough October, I think. Michigan State, okay, but then the back-to-back road games of Maryland and Minnesota. Minnesota is going to be tough. It's never an easy place to go win up there. We've seen that over the past decade or so. Maryland might be a look-ahead spot. Home against Northwestern's a bit of a shame because I think it'd be cool to play on the banks of Lake Michigan, but also, okay, sets up well for you that considering that's what you have before USC, which I think USC is going to be much better. At UCLA before your bye is awesome. Go get some warm weather and try to get revenge for what happened this year, and then you finish it off with 2 of your most difficult games of the schedule, in my opinion. Penn State, because they're Penn State, and James Franklin has that thing rolling.
They'll stick that bastard at night, a whiteout, and on NBC, and it's going to be a blizzard.
Yeah, and to add to that, there's a real chance that that's a game that Penn State needs to go make a college football playoff. And then you finish it off at the end of the year with Iowa, which who knows what to expect in that game. I think things set up well for you, but not an easy schedule, as some people said.
You've got a show that sets up well for you. Skylar is nailing it. Are we going to pretend that we didn't think this year's schedule was pretty, quote, easy at the start of the season? No, it absolutely, Skylar, you're right on. You look at what is projected and what's reality. And in reality, Nebraska is not been able to distance themselves in close games or close close games. So those are two points of improvement here moving forward.
Well, let's be real. In the modern Big Ten and the SEC, there's no easy schedules.
No.
You just hope you don't get...
You go survive.
And you hope you don't get a brutal schedule. You're trying to avoid the brutal schedule.
You have a
no
brutal
easy schedule
pulled up, don't you?
I was going to go there. I did just get this pulled up for you. Wisconsin next year. Oh, boy.
None of us are weeping.
So they have two cupcakes to start off, obviously. Their final non-con game at Bama.
Ugh.
And then they have Maryland at home. Okay. How about at Michigan, home against Iowa, home against Ohio State, at Oregon?
That's hilarious.
Oh, Luke Fickell.
That's brutal.
Oh, man, Luke Fickell might be screwed halfway through next season. Because I don't think...
He might want out himself. I'm kind of looking at Illinois as they have SC and Ohio State at home. They're at Indiana. They're at Washington. They're at Wisconsin. I bring up Illinois because they're really close to being a 9-win football team if they take care of business in their bowl game. Are they 9? There are 9-win football teams. Yeah, they're 9-3. That's where you want to go. You look at Indiana's schedule. They've been pasted for it, but not their fault, and they're in the playoff for God's sake. They're at Iowa. They're at Oregon. They're at Penn State. They host Illinois. Iowa has to deal with trips to USC. They host Oregon, Penn State, Minnesota. They're at Nebraska. They're at Iowa State. And with Oregon, they have Oregon State, the Civil War. They have Oklahoma State. They're at Penn State. They're at Iowa. And they get SC. So Ohio State, I think they open the year with Texas. So they host Texas. They're at Washington. They're at Indiana and at Wisconsin back-to-back. Penn State and Michigan. So teams that got a good deal of the cards this year, how do they respond, and what's that upward trajectory and movement look like if you're a team that went 6-6 or 5-7 or 7-5? What's your schedule look like with what you're able to retain and bring in onto your roster on top of those cornerstone pieces you got to keep on your roster?
Yeah, and I don't love, there's a couple questions that we need to answer. How does Michigan look with a 5-star freshman quarterback and Bryce Underwood coming in? Does Maryland go away from Mike Locksley and decide to go in a new direction? Do they trust what he's got bringing in because he's bringing in some
recruit
talent? And how does USC look? Does UCLA get things fixed? Does PJ Fleck go portal shop and bring in some playmakers on the outside? A lot of questions. I like how it sets up early. And does Michigan State improve with Aiden Childs in year 2 of Jonathan Smith?
I think Sparty will.
I say
he's a good coach.
That's the game I have circled. There's no comparison to what Indiana was this year, but the game we look at now and say, home against Michigan State. Okay.
Who's your Indiana in 2025?
And by the time that game rolls around, I think Sparty's going to look a lot scarier. I think Minnesota, on its face, no one's going to overlook. But that's another team that I think is probably going to be good. For some reason, Fleck always seems to have Nebraska's number. Maybe it's because Nebraska kind of ran it up a little bit on him his first year. I don't know. It's maybe not the safest assumption to say Fleck's going to even be around next year. You'd think he probably would have been floating his name out for other jobs if he was going to go this offseason, but you never know with him.
He proved himself this year.
He did.
I mean, they're 7-5, but They were a couple of hose calls away from being damn near a 9-win football team. I love SC's stretch. Illinois, that's played them brutally tough. Bye week. They host Michigan. They're at Notre Dame back-to-back. Bye week. Then they come to Lincoln.
Well, there's been apparently rumors that Marcus Freeman might be a name among NFL.
Yeah, Chicago likes him.
So...
And then here comes Urban Meyer.
Is Notre Dame what they have been next year? You don't know. There's a lot of so whenever you look at the 2025 schedule, if we learned anything from this past year, it's that you can't go from this point in the season and start marking in wins and losses.
Can't take it for granted.
Not going to do it.
Teams rise and fall.
What's your stretch? What's your retention? And what is that preseason, how hot is the fan base about having a good year? Looking the right way.
Well, and let's be clear, with the amount of guys you have in the portal right now and with the amount of guys that are going to be in the portal after spring, the fortunes of college football teams can change faster than ever if you get lucky probably isn't the right term, but if you get lucky with 2 to 3 guys that impress more than other schools around the country think, they show up, earn themselves starting roles, and turn themselves into good football players in your program. There's a lot of unknowns, and I think the fortunes or what you know about a team in the offseason can change faster than ever before with just what the reality of the college football world is right now. Like, if you thought teams surprised you last year, like Indiana, Michigan State's one of them that was better than people expected. Arizona State did some great portal shopping and really improved quickly. Like,
it needs to happen for these schools that are developmental, but they also need to flip now.
Don't think those surprising one-year flips of teams are going to go away. It's going to be even better / worse with that next year with just the amount of guys you can go find in the portal right now.
Who flips and then who sustains their flip? Or do you drift back to 500 or below like you do in the NFL? One year you're 12-4, back in the day when it was just a 16-game schedule. The next year you're 6-10. I mean, you're going to see more of that. QB1A, SAS, would Notre Dame really sell their soul for Urban Meyer? That's the one place that he probably wants to come back and coach because that is college football to him. He coached there for Lou Holtz, was retained by Bob Davie, was a wide receivers coach when Nebraska played in South Bend. So that is that's got a spot for him in his heart, if there is one in Urban Meyer, a heart that is. So let's talk about the portal names. A couple of guys, Elijah, that I want to highlight. We know that it's offensive line, defensive line, and then some skill talent, the wideouts with Dana in charge and Coach Shorts. But Jonah Pace is that edge at Central Michigan that Nebraska's looking at. He's coming to Lincoln. He's also going to Iowa City. Gaius, the center for Michigan this year, is in the portal. I like the Khalil Tafi. Tafi is the offensive tackle for Washington. So those are some guys from two of them from named schools in your own league. But give me some action. Give me a guy like Pace that's played a lot of football, wants to play up, and also the Eric Rivers kid that is getting looked at by Colorado, Penn State, Miami, the wide receiver. He's pretty good. Kent State's defensive lineman Cameron Olds, also at 6'4", 240.
One more name to note here. This from LSU's 24/7 beat writer. They apparently inquired about Williams Winery, Missouri transfer five-star. Apparently, what he is hearing is Nebraska may be the leader in the clubhouse right now.
Yeah.
That comes from an outside source, so you never know, but just something to know.
His high school coach is here. We might have a couple of names for secondary coach before the show's done.
And now, back to Hail Varsity Radio.
Back with you. Hail Varsity continues. Chris Schmidt, Elijah Herbel, Justice Rhody, and Dr. Brandon Seifert with us from Nebraska Orthopedic Center, a Jock Doc Wednesday. And let's talk some Steeler football, Dr. Brandon, and the team's top wideout, George Pickens. Outside shot, says Mike Tomlin, to play against the Eagles. That'll be a bloodbath ball game on Sunday, but you got MRI data here revealing a little bit more significant damage to that hamstring. Those soft tissue injuries, man, they can linger.
Yeah, absolutely, Chris. You know, we've had a few hamstring talks on here before, and just as we kind of wander back into some anatomy to this area, so hamstrings, what's on the back of your thigh, 4 kind of main muscle groups there that form the hamstring muscle group, essentially. But the big issue here is really kind of where, we've talked about this before, where those hamstring injuries occur. You know, fortunately, the vast majority of those occur kind of in the muscular portion, and the reason I say fortunately is those tend to heal pretty darn well on their own. Not a ton of intervention, at least not surgically for those, but definitely a lot of rehab from that perspective. And then as you start to wander kind of further up the thigh, kind of more where the hamstrings start from their origin, there's a bony prominence there that you basically sit on called your ischial tuberosity. That's where those hamstring tendons come off of. As you start to get closer to that, then things really change just in terms of kind of the duration of, recovery, and also you might have to start talking about some type of potential surgical intervention the closer you get to where those tendons attach to.
Dr. Brandon, I look at this, and you've got a source within the team that says it's a grade 2 hamstring injury. What does that mean to you?
Yeah, and so as we start to put some grades on top of these, it really is all about how much, obviously, soft tissue trauma has occurred, so how much pulling or pulling apart of those muscles have happened. And so as you start to get there's grade 1, which is kind of a little bit of a stretch, not a lot of bleeding. That's a pretty quick recovery. You're probably back anywhere from kind of 1 to 3 weeks. As you start to get into a grade 2, you start to have some fairly high level kind of stretch injury, tearing injury occur, start to see a lot more bruising, swelling, and those folks tend to be a bit more limited just in terms of how much pain they have initially and walking ability initially. And then that also plays a factor, mainly in kind of the return to play duration. So you start to get up into that grade 2 hamstring zone. Now you start talking about maybe in that kind of 3 to 6 week window. Again, these are windows, and so you can end up on either side of that. And then you start to get into that kind of grade 3 level, which is where you have that really kind of big complete tear along that muscular structure. And that can be a really long process where you might be looking at, 3 months, and you might be thinking about doing some pretty significant interventions such as like PRP injections along the way.
It's Dr. Brandon Seifert with us here at Jock Doc Wednesday on Hail Varsity Radio as we talk George Pickens, the hamstring strain, which kept him out on Sunday and will likely keep him out against the Philadelphia Eagles this upcoming Sunday. And Dr. Brandon, this injury started apparently last Thursday. George Pickens felt some discomfort during practice on Thursday. They held him out of practice on Friday as a precaution and thought he was probably going to be a go for Sunday. Sunday, he still felt uncomfortable, so they decided to hold him out. It wasn't until after that where they do the MRI and determine it's a grade 2 strain. So take me through kind of the MRI versus the outside analysis of this, because it doesn't sound like they thought it was very significant if they thought there was a chance he could play on Sunday. But then you hear grade 2 and you go, wow, that seems to be a lot more significant than just a 1 to 2 week injury.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's where that comparison of kind of that clinical exam mixed with imaging is so important. You kind of mesh those two together. You don't necessarily rely on one versus the other. You kind of mesh the two together, and really plays a role just in terms of, okay, how are you going to feel? How aggressive can I be with rehabbing you? And then also that timetable in terms of when to get back. But it is interesting with some of these. So, some of the deeper kind of hamstring injuries that occur, you may not see a lot of kind of outward physical signs of that injury so much, meaning there might not be a lot of swelling or bruising. It happens so deep kind of within the tissues, and that kind of soft tissue trauma doesn't have a chance to migrate to the surface where you would see it. And so that may be the reason why it didn't look all that impressive on the front end. The other thing that can happen here, too, is if it's maybe isolated over to a little small spot, it doesn't kind of go diffusely throughout the muscle. If it's one isolated area, that might look a lot worse on an MRI than, say, how you feel. So if you have 90% of that muscle belly really functioning well, but you have one area with a pretty high-grade area, the MRI is going to put you in a grade 2 there, but on the kind of how does it feel side, it may not be as bad. And so that might be the scenario we're dealing with here.
In terms of return to play, Dr. Brandon, how much does the pain factor in here? Is that like the be-all, end-all? If he feels good, he can go play, or do you need to go back and check again on an MRI and see, is this actually healed?
Yeah, that's a great question. So honestly, to answer that, it's kind of level dependent. And so if you're kind of migrating up into that level where teams don't really care about how much money they're spending on evaluating these, then they might consider a repeat MRI, but that even probably still pushes a little bit. I would say most of these are clinical based. How do they look on exam? How do they feel on exam, as well as with activities in terms of that return to play? And I would say that's the vast majority of how these folks get back. There are some that probably overutilize MRIs, and they may follow these a little more closely with MRI, which does, offer some valuable information just in terms of the recovery and how well does that muscle heal. But I would tell you the vast majority, especially get down to college, high school, this is going to be, kind of a clinical-based decision on when I would send them back to play based on, one, how do they feel with all the drills I throw at them, two, what's their clinical exam look like in the office.
You look at Coach Tomlin, he said, a determining factor for him is quality of participation. What can you give me when you're out there catching the football, when you're blocking? And you might say you can go, but your production is uber limited. Dr. Brandon, when it comes to just here and now treatment, yes, rest, but what else? Are we talking ice? Are we talking Advil? Are we talking heat? What are some of the moment treatments that maybe the staff is providing?
Yeah, I think with hamstrings in particular, that mobilization is really important, and so you do want to actually move and stretch these pretty early. And then the other thing that comes into play is kind of this whole concept of PRP. There are some studies coming out about the use of PRP pretty acutely after injury, within a couple days to a week. As we talked about before, PRP is essentially where we draw your blood, take it out, spin it down in a centrifuge, grab a layer, and then it has lots of healing factors in it, and you can inject it into damaged, injured areas. And so that's really starting to pick up some steam in terms of the use of that. I don't think we have a specific protocol just yet. They're still trying to tease all that out. But it seems like the early data on that's pretty good. Again, we're seeing that more utilized at kind of that higher level D1 athletics, professional athletics, just because it gets to be expensive. Insurance typically doesn't cover PRP. And so that would be an option for him, and I'm sure they're discussing that with him. In terms of like steroid shots, I wouldn't recommend that here. Steroid tends to break down muscle, stop more muscular healing, so I wouldn't recommend that here. And then the other thing you really got to get after is just, again, as we talked about, mobilization and start the strengthening. And, of course, that stretching piece is just so critical so this doesn't scar in and tighten up. Then you start to lose some of that agility and some of that speed.
Dr. Brandon Seifert with us, Nebraska Orthopedic Center at Jock Doc Wednesday. Dr. Brandon, thanks for the time today.
You bet, fellas. Take care.
Good to spend time with Dr. Brandon and Nebraska Orthopedic Center at Jock Doc Wednesday. Get the podcast, Spotify, iTunes, Google Play, the entire show, or just the segments you want to hear. Search Hail Varsity Radio, Spotify, iTunes, Google Play. We'll wind down a Wednesday with Hail Varsity.
And now, back to Hail Varsity Radio.
One final time here on a Wednesday. It's Hail Varsity. Chris Schmidt, Elijah Herbel, and Justice Rhody. Big thanks. Evan Bland, Mike Babcock, Dr. Brandon Seifert. Tomorrow on the show, we'll have Russ Hochstein, longtime Patriot, former Husker, his reaction to Bill Belichick. So Russ will be with us. We'll check in with college football insider Brad Edwards, Coach Gary Barnett, Brandon Vogel, loaded up for you. So a couple of names when it comes to Nebraska's secondary, Elijah, to look at. One is Addison Williams. He was the defensive coordinator / DB's guru and recruiting coordinator for Gus Malzahn at Central Florida. You also have Brandon Harris to think about with FAU, and he has deep connections to Miami. I think Nebraska's trying to invade and surround South Florida to keep bringing talent back to the Midwest.
Well, do you think that Texas going off to the SEC has changed Nebraska's recruiting strategy at all? Just because we know everyone's always recruited Texas for a while.
The world, yeah.
But I wonder if it has become more difficult to pull some of the overlooked 3-stars out of there now that the entire SEC world is also looking at Texas as being the place to go find the undervalued guys.
It's beyond Texas. You had TCU make the championship game a year ago. Mm-hmm. You've had SMU make their way to the playoff this year. Money. Those are two programs that, air quote, got the leftovers in Texas, okay? That is, if Oklahoma didn't want them, or LSU didn't come grab them, or Texas or Nebraska, I should say Colorado or Nebraska, right? Or Urban Meyer would go pluck a couple, 3 guys out of Texas from time to time. Baylor's been really good, especially during their Rule era. And then the Art Briles era, they were winning 9-10 ball games a year. Leach was doing his thing and killing it at Tech. Oklahoma State's always crushed it in Texas. So that whole region, and then the old Big 8 schools found their way into Texas. So it is tougher to recruit in Texas, and you haven't won at a super high level yet. If you're Nebraska. So use the connections you got. That is Simpson. That is some others down in Florida. I love Florida kids.
Use the connections and go to the place that has been giving you guy after guy after guy in terms of talent. I mean, look at the guys currently on roster from Miami that have either
They've
popped
played-
or we're expecting
played well.
to pop. Vincent Shavers is a guy. Amari Sanders is a guy that we're expecting to have a larger role next season. You look at
Barney.
Willis McGahee. You have Ja'Cory Barney. I know they're pretty excited about what Larry Tarver can be on that back end. Like, just Miami guy after Miami guy. Compared to Texas, not to say there hasn't been talent out of Texas, but your hit rate out of that South Florida area has been massive thus far.
What about your only hit rate?
Double down. If that's been where you've been finding guys and those guys have been working for you, go double down and find some more recruiters in that area and bring them onto staff.
Well, you have the other thing, too, and don't discount this. I think with Terry Braden, when I looked at his background, I think he did some work at IMGA. At IMG Academy. Yeah, IMG Academy. Just some quarterback camp stuff. So, you know what? Never hurts to give old Cam Lenhart's alma mater a ring. Back tomorrow at 4 with Hail Varsity YouTube channel. And find the podcast on Spotify, iTunes, Google Play. Thanks for hanging out.